Today, we are talking about a perfect example of what's going on in Hollywood and what's been going on in Hollywood. They do not hire people to tell a good story. They do not hire qualified people that know the source material. They hire activists to tell a story of propaganda, to use these characters, to hijack these characters in order to attack people that don't line up with their narrative. And this is what we're looking at here. Ta-Nehisi Coates, who also is the new writer for Superman, for J.J. Abrams' Superman, uses Red Skull to go after Jordan B. Peterson.
The universities have figured out how to conspire in some sense to pick the future pockets of the students that they're purporting to educate, and they're not educating them, they're indoctrinating them. They're not teaching them how to speak, they're not teaching them how to debate, they're not teaching them how to write, they're not introducing them to the classical wisdom of the Western Judeo-Christian tradition. And that's absolutely appalling, because that's what the bloody institution was there for to begin with, and that's what it's supposed to be doing.
Jordan Peterson just had his own "Are We the Baddies" moment when he recently found out that in one of the newer Captain America comics, the character of Red Skull, who you may know from the movies, originally played by Hugo Weaving in The First Avenger, is actually inspired by him, and a lot of his rhetoric and stuff around him is clearly inspired by Jordan Peterson's own work. So what we're going to get into today is the whole issue, Jordan Peterson's reaction, the reaction of anti-SJWs who feel very vindicated by this stuff, and then talk about how maybe making Jordan Peterson Red Skull is kind of accurate and isn't really as outrageous as he thinks it is. Now, before we go any further, recently YouTube demonetized my entire channel, supposedly for bullying. What had actually happened is I'd been mass flagged by some community or some fans. Thankfully, after bigger creators like the Humanist Report, the Serfs, Carl Kolinsky, and Wowshi retweeted the tweet, YouTube went back on its policies, but it's shown me how fragile this is as a source of income. So if you want to support my work continuing for the future, regardless of what YouTube do, please consider becoming a patron. If you want to join our growing community, please check out the Discord and the subreddit in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, check out @the_Kavernacle on Instagram and Twitter. And also u/TommyCahill1995 for my personal Reddit. Also, we're chugging along to 30k. We're nearly there. Don't you guys just want to see a new chocolate orange on this pile? For every 5k, we get a new one. Also, a lot of you like my live streams and have asked for this, but we also have a second channel called the Kavernacle Extra where I post all the live stream archive. If you don't have time to tune into my streams when I actually do them, so go check that out, links in the description. So I'm going to show you Jordan Peterson's reaction to all this stuff, but let's first get into the story. So The Guardian just reported on this. So Jordan Peterson shocked by Captain America villain espousing 10 rules for life. So in the new issue of Captain America, the superhero's longtime nemesis, Red Skull, espouses his views about the 10 rules for life and the feminist trap and chaos and order, and Canadian psychologist Jordan Peterson is not too pleased. Written by the award-winning Ta-Nehisi Coates, I hope I'm not butchering that name, the Marvel comic features a version of the villain who looks to radicalize young men. Peterson, the self-styled professor against political correctness who wrote the book 12 Rules for Life, is adored by young white men who feel alienated and describes chaos as being represented by the feminine and says that the masculine spirit is under assault. He took issue with the characterization, which will go on to now. So Peterson tweeted, "Do I really live in a universe where Ta-Nehisi Coates has written a Captain America comic featuring a parody of my ideas as part of the philosophy of Red Skull?" So here's the strip that he tweeted. So Captain America saying, "It's the same for all of them. Young men, weak, looking for purpose. I found the flag, you found the badge. They found the skull." He tells them what they've always longed to hear, that they're secretly great, that the whole world is against them, that if they're truly men, they'll fight back. And bingo, that's their purpose, that's what they live for, and that's what they'll die for. So now Peterson also tweeted, "What the hell?" as the Red Skull has like a page on the internet that has 10 rules for life and talk about the feminist trap as mentioned in the article. So here's another panel from the comic. So Red Skull saying, "What has happened to the men of the world is truly one of the greatest tragedies of our time. Once the American man was a conqueror, now he is but a caretaker. A caretaker of what? Amorphous dream, a dream of nothing. But what I offer them is more than just some petty dream, more than a life of tending the hearth. No more shall women be summoned to fight your battles. I offer steel to your spine and iron for your guts. I offer you the sword of manhood. Now, Peterson took this well, started tweeting out Red Skull pictures with his own quotes on them. So one saying, if your life is not what it could be, try telling the truth. If you cling desperately to an ideology or wallow in nihilism, try telling the truth. Another one saying, the secret to your existence is right in front of you. It manifests itself as all those things you know you should do but are avoiding. Another one, don't compare yourself with other people. Compare yourself with who you were yesterday. No one gets away with anything ever, so take responsibility for your own life. Don't lie about anything ever. Lying leads to hell. Now, of course, Ben Shabino has to chime in. The fact that Ta-Nehisi Coates was trying to come up with the most evil supervillain he could, and the best he could do as a Canadian psychologist who writes about Jungian analysis and encourages young men to make their beds is pretty telling. Now, I'm going to get back to this point in terms of how these people can't see Jordan Peterson actually being a good, inspiration for Red Skull. Now, this Red Skull isn't the traditional Red Skull. He's actually someone who's in the KGB. I think he's called Alexander Lukin, and he is like half Red Skull, half himself. He actually strangely looks very much like Jordan Peterson. I don't know if this is just a generic, white guy with a beard, but he does kind of look like him, so the comparison is quite apparent. But this version of Red Skull has gotten the attention because Jordan Peterson tweeted him out. But recently what they've been doing with the comics is Red Skull has also been parroting Trump stuff. So Jose talking about it and posted some screenshots where Red Skull says, but that is only the beginning. Your entire culture is under siege. The principles your country founded upon lost in the name of tolerance. Your religion, your beliefs, your sense of community all tossed aside like trash. And you cannot even speak out against it lest you be called a bigot. And who benefits from all this but the vultures feasting on the carcass, the bankers who stole your homes out from under you, and the politicians they purchased? Well, let them call you what they will. I know who you truly are. The beginning of a revolution, the first to see the collapse of the old guard and the road to something glorious, the glory of Hydra. Now, because we love looking at this stuff, here's a quick montage of my favourite anti-SJWs all freaking out. And do I even really need to show you this stuff? I will. But they're all pretty much saying what you've heard them say for every different thing.
Now, I know I haven't been doing a lot of uploads here to the channel recently. Now, again, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who is involved with Marvel, is also the writer for the new Superman movie that J.J. Abrams is bringing to us. Do you think this guy is going to actually tell us a good story about Superman? Do you really think that's going to happen? Because I'm here to tell you it will not happen. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a terrible person who has said horrible things about white people. Things that you shouldn't be able to get away with. But of course, we know how the social justice narrative works, and we know how the oppression Olympics works. And this person is a bad, bad person. And of course, Superman is my favorite comic book character of all time. Superman should be the person that symbolizes hope and truth, justice, and the American way, as we know. And I don't know what Ta-Nehisi Coates and J.J. Abrams plan to do to Superman. They want to hijack pre-existing characters that have a massive following and a massive fan base, and they have mainstream appeal. And what they can do is they can then use propaganda and completely change these characters. The only thing that resembles these characters is that they remain the character in name alone, but they are spewed with the propaganda of the left. And then what happens is a lot of the mainstream, the people that don't really, check things out, the general audience, they'll eat it up for a little while.
Instances where the left think the far left, I must stress this is the far left, the woke far left, who are as disgusting as the far right. They think they have a victory, when in actuality, they have exposed their own ignorance, their own stupidity, and because they see themselves as the good guys, however they are far from it, whenever they try to portray a villain, then they often attach, which actually make that villain relatable and understandable, and more of a hero than the hero that they write.
Now, the writer of this sounds pretty cool. I've read about him on Wikipedia and some other places. His father was in the Black Panthers. He talks a lot about racism in America. That's a theme in a lot of his works. Again, a valuable writer and from a group of people who traditionally don't get to write comic books like this, and it is quite good that he's writing something like Captain America. Of course, anti-SJWs feel vindicated because they're like, oh, leftist SJW writer attacking, the great Jordan Peterson over his innocent advice about changing your habits so you can overcome different things. Now, this version of Red Skull is like part KGB officer and stuff, but Red Skull has primarily been the head of Hydra, and as part of his backstory, he's also often part of the German military in World War II. Hydra is sort of like a splinter group, so you get the Hail Hydra instead of what it traditionally is, and that's shown in the first Captain America film in the MCU. So he's, fash adjacent and everything, and that is probably why Jordan Peterson is so outraged and can't believe he'd be compared to someone like Red Skull. Now, I've been talking about this a lot, but Jordan Peterson, while not being on the alt-right or anything like that, he is so rabidly anti-left that he often pushes far-right conspiracy theories. So Jordan Peterson literally believes cultural Marxism is a thing. And even though this is a widely debunked conspiracy theory, he pushes this all the time. I've made videos on it, him talking about them infiltrating various strands of academia, mainly nothing to do with his subject, mainly other subjects like English and women's studies.
The universities have figured out how to conspire in some sense to pick the future pockets of the students that they're purporting to educate, and they're not educating them, they're indoctrinating them, they're not teaching them how to speak, they're not teaching them how to debate, they're not teaching them how to write, they're not introducing them to the classical wisdom of the Western Judeo-Christian tradition. And that's absolutely appalling, because that's what the bloody institution was there for to begin with, and that's what it's supposed to be doing. And so what people need to do in order to know that they should stop taking the courses is to know what it is that these courses are aiming at. So that needs to be explained. Then they need to know what language the people who teach these courses are using in order to fulfill those aims. Then they need to know how to identify the courses. Then they need to know that it's in their best interest, both, I would say, spiritually and economically, to avoid those courses and those disciplines like the plague. And then maybe we can get the disciplines that have become entirely corrupt and the ones that started that way to put themselves back together before they run themselves out of existence completely. And I might as well name a few of the disciplines that I think are particularly reprehensible to begin with. Obviously, I'm painting this with a very broad brush, and I'm not making the claim that every single person who engages in activity within all of these disciplines has been corrupted beyond comprehension by the postmodernist neo-Marxists, but it's close enough, first pass approximation. So, as I said already, women's studies and all the ethnic studies and racial studies groups, man, those things have to go, and the faster they go, the better. They should have never been put... It would have been better had they never been part of the university to begin with, as far as I can tell. Sociology, that's corrupt. Anthropology, that's corrupt. English literature, that's corrupt. Maybe the worst offender are the faculties of education.
But yeah, Peterson literally believes cultural Marxism is a thing. Now, this is why he is so helpful to the far right, because by using this, anti-feminism, anti-left crusade, he helps radicalize people in anti-left politics. But because he's using a far-right conspiracy theory, which he believes, and he's pushing this, it makes it very easy for people to go further down a far-right rabbit hole. So cultural Marxism is, of course, about Marxists, is, of course, about the Frankfurt School, these Jewish, philosophers and academics who had to flee Germany in the 1930s. It's about their views on race, on, women's rights and stuff like that. And basically what they said, from these guys, they've unleashed this leftist infiltration of academia that is still going on today. Of course, that is very problematic in itself, but they believe this stuff. But when you have people saying, well, look what these Jewish scholars unleashed in America, now let's throw Judeo-Bolshevism on you so you can take that just a little step further. Well, these guys weren't just like leftist people who wanted to push a left-wing agenda. They're actually doing it for a conspiracy to take over the world. That's why Jordan Peterson, in my mind, can be easily an inspiration for someone like Red Skull. who is, you know, fascist adjacent, is linked with the Germans in World War II. But that's just one part of it, and that is just, you know, his hysteria. And I do believe in a lot of instances, Peterson's worldview might be linked to his problems with things like addiction, because he is extremely paranoid. So paranoid that he has Marxist propaganda from like the Soviet Union all over his house at home. He obviously has gone through a tough time with his family and everything, but if you read about his life recently, it's clear he's not in a great mental headspace because of his problems of addiction. But that also plays into the Red Skull thing as well, is that what Jordan Peterson does, apart from pushing far-right conspiracy theories, anti-left conspiracy theories, and being hysterical about the left, he also has self-help, which is very bad self-help advice, because first of all, he doesn't follow it himself. Second of all, it's nothing profound. It's very, very basic stuff. So I made a video about this before where he talks about video game addiction.
So some weeks you're going to come back and say, geez, I backslid completely and I played for 4 hours a day for 7 days. But it doesn't matter, because that doesn't mean you failed. It just means that you slid back. You want to calculate it over a month or something like that. And, you know, generally speaking, a month later, the person's down to something like 2 hours a day, and you've figured out ways of filling their time in with something productive otherwise, and they're on their way. And the general consequence of that is that every time they manage an accomplishment, they get a little stronger in character, they get a little bit more confident in their ability, they get a little bit less racked with self-disgust, they get a little bit more hopeful about the future, and they get more confident that they can make another change. And if you're patient, and you have to be patient with yourself that way, it's like you reward those incremental improvements and you don't get all cynical about them, and you think, okay, just imagine what would happen if you kept doing that every week for 10 years. And the answer to that is, things would be so much better for you that you can't even imagine it.
Now, what his problem is with the framing of things like addiction, even if it's video games, he puts the entire thing as a personal problem. If you are an addict to something like video games or whatever it is, that is on you. That is a personal defect of you. And through his simplistic advice and simplistic steps, you can overcome this stuff. I don't understand why Jordan Peterson is so popular when he just parrots far-right propaganda and conservative propaganda from America while giving advice that is really not that good or revolutionary, that frames systemic issues as personal failings and stuff, where addiction is often not people's fault. It's not a personal flaw. It's societal problems. Like Peterson himself has experienced, it's personal problems. His wife had a terminal illness and stuff, and that all factored into him becoming an addict, but he can't see it as this problem. And through his self-help books, he's got an audience who are pretty fanatical, who now believe anything he says, right? So while the Captain America comic and what these guys are focusing on is this pretty like benign self-help line, because he's making the Red Skull memes with his own stuff from, 12 Rules for Life. But when he gets them in, he then starts pushing far-right conspiracy theories. If that is not a good inspiration for Red Skull, I don't know what is. If Red Skull is enticing young disillusioned men with self-help and then pushing conspiracy theories on them afterwards, again, sounds like a pretty good inspiration for Red Skull. Not that any of these guys can really see that, because they agree with this stuff, especially anti-SJWs. Now, let's get into the final point about Captain America being made left-wing by this one writer. Now, while Captain America on the surface might seem like a symbol for maybe conservatism, patriotism, it's clear recently what they've done with him is make him more like anti-authoritarian and stuff. Now, this even goes back to the old days of Captain America. There's also a comic arc where Nixon turns out to be one of the villains as well. And then recently in the Marvel movies, you have Captain America, the Winter Soldier, where the whole plot is about, this authoritarian plan, which turns out to be from Hydra, but is about, making people safer by working out who will be a threat and neutralizing the threat before they become a threat. And Captain America doesn't like that. Then you have the Soviet Accords, where he doesn't want to sign it because he does not trust the government anymore. So he doesn't sign it, and he essentially goes rogue and doesn't do that, because it seems like they're pushing Captain America in this more, liberal, anti-authoritarian direction. So it's not the first time Captain America has either covered contemporary politics or has covered political issues. And it's always funny, these guys love to cry about politics and left-wing politics in Marvel or Star Wars while totally ignoring the politics in the past. You know, I've spoken at length about Star Wars, how George Lucas has said that the rebels were inspired by the North Vietnamese and the NLF, and the prequels obviously are completely political and are about rising authoritarianism, but anti-SJWs are like, I love the prequels and original trilogy, no politics there, but I hate the sequel trilogy, which are infested with SJW politics, because although the message of those films is fairly liberal and centrist, because they have some minority women in them, too political for me. But if we actually followed their message of no politics in anything, everything would be boring. But I've made videos about, you know, the Call of Duty marketing, where it was about Yuri Bezmenov and Ronald Reagan, and they love that stuff. Turns out, you know, the actual Call of Duty game didn't promote those things, but the marketing played into them, and they loved it. So make your mind up. You either like politics in art or you don't. Anyway, to conclude, I wish Jordan Peterson and people who like him would maybe reflect why he makes a good villain in a Marvel comic book, not just, you know, get offended and be like, I just write self-help books for young men. How could I ever be portrayed as Red Skull when Jordan Peterson speaks with authority about things he knows nothing about, mostly politics, whether he's talking about feminism, communism, socialism. He doesn't actually know about these things, but he has this cult following of people who think he does and take him at face value, so much so he will help indoctrinate them in far-right conspiracy theories, which could lead them to becoming even worse people in the future. Sounds like a supervillain to me. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. If you like the video, like, maybe subscribe to the channel as well. Come join our communities on my Discord and my subreddit. All that stuff is in the description. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.